Freya Wells moved quietly through the grand foyer of the historic concert hall, her dark Usher uniform blending unobtrusively among the swirling gowns and tuxedos of the evening's distinguished guests. The air was thick with the scent of polished wood and floral arrangements, and the soft murmur of anticipation floated above the low hum of the orchestra tuning on stage. She kept her gaze low, offering gentle directions with a polite smile whenever approached, careful not to interrupt the refined sparkle of the gala. Her shoes, plain and scuffed from years of standing, clicked softly against the marble floor as she guided a cluster of elderly patrons toward their reserved seats. A woman near the entrance glanced down and whispered to her companion unmistakably loud, "Can you believe she's working here in those clothes? Doesn't she know where she is?" Freya caught the edge of a regional accent in the comment, barely masking a sneer. Another guest misheard her brief affirmative and smiled condescendingly. "Oh, bless her heart, she probably doesn't understand all this." She ignored them, accustomed to the way the elite often overlooked and dismissed those they saw as invisible. The orchestra began playing, a lush string movement that filled the hall with warmth, when an acrid smell drifted from just behind the wooden stage. Freya, standing near a side exit, noticed a thin wisp of smoke curling around the edges of a heavy curtain. A sudden crackle whispered through the air, and flames blossomed with ruthless speed. Patrons gasped and tumbled backward as the fire alarm blared, shards of panic spreading like wildfire across the glittering crowd. The gala, in the blink of an eye, changed from an evening of art and elegance to a scene of urgent chaos. Panic erupted in the grand concert hall as the flames licked higher behind the stage, casting a flickering orange glow that clashed with the tranquil darkness of the auditorium. Guests stumbled and pushed, their fine clothes ruffling and their voices rising in alarm. The orchestra abruptly ceased playing, the musicians frozen and uncertain. The elegant chatter turned to shouted questions and fearful cries. The blaring fire alarm added to the cacophony, but instead of order, it seemed to incite a frantic surge toward the exits. Some guests rushed forward without caution, jostling others. An elderly man tripped over a chair leg, falling hard against the polished floor, and a woman screamed when her diamond necklace caught the sleeve of a passing jacket. Staff members shouted directions, but their voices were lost in the chaos. Freya Wells felt the heat intensify on her back and smelled the sharp sting of smoke. Despite the rising frenzy around her, her breath stayed even, her hands steady. She refused to be swept up in the panic. The sheer force of anxiety pulsing through the crowd would only worsen injuries or block evacuation paths. She knew the cost of chaos, she had witnessed its aftermath too many times. Her voice rose clear and calm. "Everyone, please stay calm. Please follow the ushers. Move steadily toward the exits." Her eyes locked on a stagehand fumbling by the curtains. "Find the fire extinguishers, now." A few heads turned, some narrowed in disbelief or irritation. "Who is she to be telling us what to do?" muttered a wealthy man to a companion. But Freya didn't slow. "Security, clear the side exits. There's a blocked doorway, we need that path free." Several ushers near her hesitated, unsure whether to obey guidance from the plain-faced woman they usually overlooked. But the urgency in her tone pierced their doubt, pushing them into action. They moved efficiently, stepping between guests like skilled traffic controllers. Near the right wing stage door, a stage manager, a burly man coughing and shielding his eyes, stood trapped by tangled cables and fallen lighting equipment. He coughed violently, smoke seeping from beneath the drapes. Without hesitation, Freya ducked under a low beam and reached him, her grip firm yet reassuring. "Stay with me," she said softly. "I'm getting you out." She lifted his arm around her shoulder, helping him limp through the narrow corridor away from the flames. The air was thick and hot, but Freya's resolve sharpened. She fought the rising panic inside herself with the kind of calm born from experience. Back in the main hall, a group of guests paralyzed with fear jammed near a side exit. An imposing stack of speaker equipment blocked their way. The crowd behind pressed forward, pinning them in. An elderly woman's eyes filled with tears, hands trembling as she clutched a silk shawl. Freya spotted the threat and pushed through the crowd. "Security. Clear this area right now," she commanded. 2 guards hurried over, moving equipment aside and opening a clear path. Freya took the elderly woman's arm and gently guided her out, whispering comfort despite the smoke stinging at her own lungs. Throughout the hall, her methods rippled outward. She signaled early responders to form small groups that moved carefully down designated aisles, discouraging reckless pushing. A mother struggling with a toddler in her arms caught Freya's eye, and with a nod, the usher stationed near the entrance helped them onto a stretcher borrowed from the medical booth. Instead of adding to the discord, Freya's voice cut through the rising panic like a beacon of order. A few bystanders began following her lead, their movements slowing, breaths evening, faces settling. The initial surge toward chaos yielded, switching from frantic escape to organized evacuation. Behind the scenes, the fire spread more rapidly along the backstage electrical wiring, but without the flames intruding into the audience area. Freya's quick directions had prevented the crowd from spilling into dangerous zones. Firefighters burst through the side entrance, their heavy boots pounding on the wooden floor as water hoses unfurled, dousing sparks. Some guests, once dismissive of her presence, now watched Freya with eyes wide in astonishment. The woman who sneered earlier offered her a tentative nod from across the room. The organizers, usually focused on social appearances, found themselves helplessly impressed by this unassuming usher's calm leadership. With the flames contained and evacuation nearing completion, Freya's knees finally threatened to buckle under exhaustion. Yet she remained by the stage entrance, checking back on the security team and staff for anyone needing help. The orchestra manager, shaken but unharmed, approached and grasped her hand tightly. "I don't know what we would have done without you," he said, voice thick with gratitude. Around them, emergency personnel began ushering guests outside into the fresh night air, the crisis remoting from flames to shaking nerves. As her breath slowed and the tension in her shoulders eased, Freya took a moment to absorb the sudden stillness, the way the room had shifted from fear to quiet relief. The mocking whispers that had drifted past her just minutes before fell mute in the weight of her actions. For once, the invisible usher had become the focal point, the steady hand guiding a storm. The applause was still hesitant, but undeniable. The elite patrons and staff alike turned to face her, no longer seeing just a background figure, but someone who had saved their lives. The blaze behind the stage had been fierce, but Freya's calm hands had steered the night away from disaster. Still, as she caught her breath amid the lingering smoke and residual murmurs, her mind drifted back to other moments when she had stood firm against chaos. Flickering images of a very different life played behind her eyes, memories etched deeply into the seams of her every nerve. Years before, Freya had worn a different kind of uniform, one not simply a dark blazer and plain shoes, but a jacket emblazoned with medical insignia, paired with sturdy boots, ready for anything. She was a seasoned emergency medical technician then, navigating the frenetic streets with practiced urgency and empathy. She remembered the sharp torque of adrenaline, the sharp metallic scent of antiseptic, the bright, blinking lights of ambulances weaving through traffic. One scene came rushing in, Freya kneeling beside a teenager sprawled in a crumpled bike frame on a rain-dappled pavement. Her gloved hands checked the boy's pulse as she effectively worked to manage his airway. Around her, paramedics climbed ladders and moved swiftly, chattering in clipped tones about next steps. Freya's face was set, commanding yet tender, masking any fear under a blanket of professionalism. The boy's eyes flickered open, and relief swept through her. In another memory, Freya stood in a bustling emergency room, amid monitors beeping and doctors barking orders. The sterile light cast harsh shadows, but her focus never wavered. She administered care to a burn victim, her fingers steady as she cleaned wounds and soothed pain. A patient's grateful smile had become her small, sustaining reward. That past life had not only been about skills and procedures, but the intense connections forged in moments of crisis. Freya had earned profound respect for her competence and composure. Physicians and colleagues trusted her implicitly. She had been a lifeline, a source of assurance where uncertainty reigned. Yet behind that sturdy exterior, a quiet fracture had formed. Her younger brother, Liam, had fallen gravely ill. Despite every emergency response, every rushed hospital night, he slipped further from health. The once vibrant boy who loved soccer and laughter was reduced to fragile breaths and whispered words. Freya had spent countless nights by his bedside, cheeks streaked with tears she refused to show publicly. She felt powerless, devastated, the weight of losing someone she loved while still trying to save others. The heartbreak gnawed at her resolve. After Liam's passing, the urgency of her job, so often a dance between life and death, became unbearable. She began questioning whether endless crises could ever heal wounds that engulfed her soul. Slowly, reluctantly, she stepped away from frontline work. That transition was anything but smooth. Without her steady career, Freya took on various modest jobs to support herself and her young daughter, Clara. Ushering at events like the Philharmonic Gala offered reliable hours and a chance to remain close to urban life, even if under a veil of anonymity. Freya's medical training never disappeared, though. She quietly maintained her certification with online training modules and volunteered at local blood drives, nursing classes, and clinics when time allowed. She dreamed privately of returning to emergency response, but doubts often pinned her down. A few scenes surfaced of late-night study sessions at her tiny apartment, Clara asleep in a nearby crib while Freya pored over medical textbooks, practice scenarios lighting up her laptop screen. There were moments of exhaustion and frustration, balancing motherhood with unfulfilled ambition. Sometimes she caught herself scanning news reports of accidents and emergencies, mentally rehearsing first aid steps, silently willing she could intervene. Yet, she was haunted by feelings of inadequacy, the fear that her time had been lost. Her simple Usher uniform and quiet demeanor masked a reservoir of knowledge and strength forged in crisis and pain. It was this depth that found expression the night of the Philharmonic fire, her experience transforming chaos into order, terror into safety. Those memories flickered past but did not overwhelm her as the night unfolded. Freya knew this moment was a beginning, not a final acceptance of invisibility. The past had prepared her for this, had always been waiting beneath the surface for the chance to emerge. In the shadowed backstage corridor, she had repeated procedures known cold. She understood fire behavior and evacuation logistics instinctively, skills honed under pressure. The hands that had once steadied broken bones, applied tourniquets, administered oxygen now guided frightened patrons to safety with the same unshakable calm. She swallowed hard, recognizing the irony of her invisibility at such an elite event despite all she bore within. Yet, the silence that followed her decisive actions planted a seed of possibility. Perhaps this time, her presence would not be dismissed, nor her worth overlooked. As the hall emptied and emergency crews tidied the final edges of the disaster, Freya tucked her memories carefully away, turning back to the present. The glitter of crystal chandeliers above no longer felt worlds apart from her reality, but part of the same tapestry she wore quietly beneath her uniform. Her past might have folded closed for a time, but it was alive and ready to be woven back into her future. Tonight's fire was not just a crisis averted, it was a bridge between the woman she had been and the woman she was becoming. Outside, the night air was cool and sharp as it rushed through the open doors, carrying with it the scent of burnt wood and hope mingled strangely in the dark. The concert hall had emptied, but the echoes of the fire's chaos hung heavy in the air. Guests lingered near the grand entrance, wrapped in shawls or clutching trembling hands, the night's shock settling into a fragile calm. Word of Freya Wells's steady leadership during the firefight was beginning to ripple through the crowd, carried not just in hushed conversations but now through spontaneous applause and heartfelt commendations. A woman in a flowing emerald gown, her eyes moist, approached Freya, her usual sophistication softened by gratitude. "I was so frightened," she said, voice trembling slightly. I thought it was the end of the night, and maybe worse." She reached out, clasping Freya's hand warmly. "Thank you. You helped more than you know." Freya forced a small smile but felt a swell of emotion she quickly pushed aside. She was used to staying in the background, working the edges of society's grand productions, unnoticed and uncelebrated. This was a new and strange experience. The crowd that had earlier dismissed her with barely a glance was now turning their faces toward her with genuine respect. Guests who had ignored her presence just hours before stumbled over words to express their admiration. A man in an expensive tailored suit gestured apologetically. "Miss Wells," he began, "I must say, your composure was remarkable. We owe you our thanks." Behind the velvet ropes, staff members and fellow ushers approached cautiously at first, then with more confidence, emboldened by the glow spreading around Freya. The jittery staffer who had whispered about her attire earlier now offered her a tentative smile. Another usher handed her a bottle of water, their eyes conveying a silent message: "You're no longer just one of us." In the shifting crowd, smartphones appeared, catching glimpses of the moment. Videos of Freya directing evacuation, calming frightened guests, and supporting the injured began circulating online. Social media feeds buzzed with praise and awe, painting her as the unexpected hero of the evening. The local news crew moved swiftly, setting up near the entrance. A shaken but grateful gala attendee volunteered a brief, heartfelt interview. "She was the reason I got out safely. I don't know what I would have done without her." His eyes glistened with tears as he spoke, his voice breaking with emotion. Within hours, the name Freya Wells was trending locally. Articles appeared highlighting her quick assessment of the situation and decisive action, noting how she emerged as a rock of calm in a sea of panic. Photos surfaced, not just from the gala, but from years past, showing Freya in her early career as an EMT. Glowing testimonials from former colleagues praised her expertise and dedication. This new light cast unexpected shadows back at the concert hall. The elite attendees, once aloof, now greeted Freya warmly, some seeking her out with handshakes and sincere compliments. Invitations to quieter, private events were quietly extended, signaling a shift in the social fabric she navigated so silently. Even her co-workers began treating her differently. The barriers of invisibility, once firmly in place, began to crumble. A fellow usher, previously indifferent, asked her advice on handling a nervous guest. Another shared a laugh, inviting her to join a small group for coffee after work. It was as if the night's events had cracked open a door, even a window, into inclusion. Freya herself felt the subtle transformation. Yet, she remained grounded. She knew this respect was new and fragile, earned not by titles or appearance but by the quiet force of competence and compassion. She absorbed the welcome but kept her focus on the tasks still ahead, checking that no one was left behind, that the venue was safe. The online community's embrace was a balm to parts of her that had long felt unseen. Old interviews she had given in her EMT days resurfaced, clips of her calmly explaining emergency procedures to reporters, highlighting her passion for saving lives. Screenshots of past commendations filled timelines, a rekindling of a chapter she'd thought closed. Freya's daughter, Clara, who had waited anxiously at home while her mother worked the gala, became the center of frequent messages and gifts from newfound well-wishers. Friends and strangers alike sent notes of encouragement, recognizing the burden and quiet strength of a single mother balancing hardship with hope. Still, the whirlwind of recognition felt tentative, almost surreal. Freya knew the real challenge would be sustaining this respect beyond the night, beyond headlines, beyond fleeting praise. She understood resilience was not only what showed in crises, but sustained in everyday moments, the quiet acts of courage no gala could capture. But for now, as she stood beneath the gilded chandeliers, hearing genuine thanks ripple through the crowd, something shifted, a tangible sense that, for the first time in a long while, her presence was valued not in spite of who she was but because of the unyielding strength she carried within. The woman once muzzled by invisibility now had a voice echoed by others, a space undeniable and deserved. Days passed since the Philharmonic fundraiser, and the echoes of that harrowing night still reverberated through Freya Wells's life. Invitations and messages poured in, some from unexpected corners. Among them was a letter delivered with no fanfare, yet carrying profound significance. It bore the emblem of a prestigious emergency training institute, renowned for cultivating the country's finest first responders. The letter was an invitation, a place in their elite paramedic recertification program, designed not only to refresh skills but to empower experienced professionals ready to lead the next generation. Freya reread the letter carefully. An open instructor position was mentioned, too, highlighting her potential to shape emergency response education. The offer was a validation of talents she had long concealed under layers of modest jobs and quiet humility. For a moment, doubt washed over her. The memories of past heartbreak returned, the night Liam slipped away despite all she'd done, the exhaustion and heartbreak that pushed her away from the career she loved. She hesitated, unsure if she had the strength to step fully back into a world so demanding, so raw. The fears of reopening old wounds crowded her mind, whispering that maybe this was safer, this life she led now, away from emergency sirens and tragic scenes. But as she looked at the photo of Clara laughing in her bedroom, the thought settled deep in her chest. She owed her daughter a mother who embraced her true self, a woman who no longer hid behind anonymity or silence. The gratitude expressed by those she helped, the faces still vivid in her mind's eye, stirred a quiet fire within. Freya called the Institute's coordinator, a warm and encouraging voice on the other end reassuring her that the program welcomed her experience and passion. They spoke at length, not just about skills and dates, but about possibility, resilience, and the importance of reclaiming purpose. The conversation was the first step toward a new path. The journey was not without challenge. Training days were long, demanding, and physically taxing. Freya grappled with the tension between motherhood and professional rigor, often managing coursework late into the night after bedtime stories and lullabies. Yet, with each session, her confidence deepened. In workshops and simulations, her instincts returned with precision and vigor. The doubts that lingered began to dissolve beneath the steady proof of capability. Colleagues who gathered in the program greeted her with respect, some recalling news of her recent heroism, others recognizing her dedication. She found herself drawn into discussions not as a hesitant outsider, but as a valued contributor. Invitations to lead practice scenarios and share real-world insights became commonplace. When she was offered the chance to teach a segment on evacuation protocols, Freya embraced the role with genuine enthusiasm. She crafted lessons steeped in practical experience, emphasizing calm assessment and clear communication. Her students, emergency responders in training, absorbed her guidance eagerly, their trust in her growing steadily. Outside the classroom, Freya began to rebuild bridges to the community she had left behind. She volunteered at local health clinics on weekends, resumed participation in mother support groups, and attended gatherings where she shared her journey openly. The mantle of invisibility slipped further from her shoulders. The evenings brought moments she cherished above all: the reunion with Clara after long days, the soft glow of reading lamps as stories unfolded and laughter filled their home. In those times, Freya felt complete, the intertwined roles of mother and healer no longer at odds but woven tightly into one. A few months later, standing in a bright and bustling emergency training center, Freya donned a crisp new uniform patch sewn with her name and credentials. The fabric felt like armor forged from trials, triumphs, and untold resilience. She adjusted the collar, glanced at the familiar badge gleaming under the fluorescent lights, and took a steady breath. This was no longer a job hidden behind courtesy or shadowed by doubt. It was a reclaimed identity, a declaration without words. She walked through the hallways with purposeful steps, greeted by colleagues and students alike, each nod and smile confirming the place she rightfully held. Later that night, returning home after her first shift as an instructor, Freya found Clara waiting on the doorstep, her small arms stretching upward. The embrace was warm and unwavering, a perfect punctuation to the day's battles and victories. In that embrace, Freya recognized herself, not invisible, not hesitant, but a woman who had leaned into every fear and uncertainty to emerge stronger. Somewhere between the chaos of flames and the quiet strength of nurture, she had found a new direction shining brightly. She was ready now, to teach, to lead, and above all, to live fully. No longer contained by doubt or invisibility, Freya Wells had stepped forward, not just as an usher guiding patrons on one fateful night, but as a woman moving confidently into her own light.